Imagine it is 1972. The lunch bell rings in the bustling heart of Nairobi.
Right, right.
You step out of your workplace, breathing in the air of a free, independent Kenya. But instead of walking into a cafe to actually enjoy the fruits of that freedom, you walk down to Uhuru Park.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, you lie down under a tree, close your eyes, and just pretend to sleep. And you do this because you literally cannot afford a meal.
That is just,
You window shop to pass the hour, waiting for the end of the month just to taste meat. I mean, that was a reality captured by the musician Gabriel Omolo in his hit song, Lunchtime.
It's a powerful image for sure.
It really is. And it begs this massive question, right? If this was freedom, who actually got free? Welcome to the Kenya Wananotam Movement KWMHM podcast.
That's such a profound question to start with, because we usually expect history to be, sequential. First, you have the struggle, then the victory, and then the reward.
Right, the happy ending.
Exactly. But post-colonial Kenya, well, it completely shattered that blueprint.
Which is exactly why we are not doing some surface-level summary today. We are doing a massive deep dive into a huge stack of sources you, the listener, actually provided us.
Yeah, we have historical documents, academic journals, political histories, cultural critiques. It's a lot.
It is a lot. And our mission here is to unpack the untold history of Kenya's liberation, the post-colonial betrayal over land, and the courageous voices who fought for the forgotten masses.
And, we really have to emphasize the power of this platform before we get into it. This platform is not a news site. It's a people's record.
Right.
Every comment, every truth written here forms a trail that no spin doctor can erase. When you post, you're not just reacting. You're documenting Kenya as it is. History isn't written in offices anymore. It's written here by you.
I love that. And to everyone listening, I mean, many Kenyans think change begins in Nairobi. Wrong. It begins where you live. Whether you are in Turkana, Maikweni, Kisumu, or Nyeri. When citizens share what happens locally, patterns appear. The same tricks, the same hands. That's how accountability begins. Not with titles, but with ordinary people refusing to be fooled twice.
So true.
We want your stories. What is happening or what's not? Who is doing something right? Who keeps promising and vanishing? Tell it as it is. No filters. No spin. Your words can wake up the next person to act. That is how a movement grows, one honest post at a time.
I should probably add a quick note on the nature of the sources before we plunge in, though.
Oh, yeah, good point.
We are examining some highly charged political ideologies today. We're talking everything from conservative pro-Western capitalism to radical left-wing socialism.
Right. Both ends of the spectrum.
Exactly. And just to be clear, we are not endorsing any specific political side here.
Yeah.
Our role is just to impartially report the historical viewpoints exactly as they exist in the source material. We're just letting the mechanics of the past speak for themselves.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the literal ground zero of this entire history, which is land.
Always comes back to land.
It always does. The sources spent a lot of time contrasting pre-colonial land management with the actual colonial conquest. So I'm looking at the Kaggia system here, and it mentions something called the Umbari. How did this actually function on a, day-to-day basis?
So to understand the Umbari, you really have to strip away the whole Western concept of a title deed. Land just wasn't a commodity you could flip for a profit, right? It was an intergenerational identity. The Umbari was basically a family group, sometimes spanning hundreds of people, all descending from one founder, and the physical land that belonged to them was called the Githaka. But they didn't own it like you own a smartphone or a car.
Okay, but if nobody owned it, how did they stop people from just, fighting over the best plots right next to the river?
Well, through an incredibly sophisticated system of mutual obligation, they had a Muramati who was essentially the clan head, but the Muramati was a trustee, not a landlord.
Okay, so more of a manager.
Exactly. His job was to manage the distribution of the Githaka. So if a family within the Mumbari grew, he ensured they had space. And more importantly, if there was unused land, the Muramati could allocate it to Ahoy.
Ahoy meaning like tenants.
Sort of, yeah, but the word tenant implies paying rent with cash. The Ahoy were newcomers, maybe people displaced by a famine, or maybe they were just seeking new alliances.
Oh, I see.
Right, so they were granted the right to use the land in exchange for loyalty, labor, and just, integration into the wider community.
So it's like, okay, think of the Muramati as a community trust manager. The right of control, which the Muramati had, was completely separated from the right of use, which the Ahoy had.
Yes, exactly.
That is brilliant, actually. It ensures the land is always productive and community bonds are constantly reinforced.
It is brilliant. What's fascinating here is, well, imagine you are part of this system. It has sustained your ancestors for literally centuries. Then the British arrive.
Yeah, here we go.
They look at this complex, fluid ecosystem of mutual rights, and they don't see a highly functioning society. They just see unoccupied land.
Let me guess, they use some kind of legal gymnastics to justify taking it.
Oh, very precise legal gymnastics. The colonial government instituted the 1902 Crown Lands Ordinance and then later the Land Titles Ordinance of 1908.
And what did those do exactly?
Well, here is the mechanism of how they essentially stole the country. The British simply declared that all land without a registered paper claim belonged to the Crown.
But Africans didn't have paper claims. They had the Murang'a system.
Exactly, which the British courts deliberately refused to recognize as legitimate ownership.
Wow.
So literally with the stroke of a pen in some Nairobi office, millions of Kenyans were legally transformed into squatters on their own ancestral land.
That is wild.
A settler could just walk up, point a gun, show a piece of paper, and force the Ahoy and the Murang'a alike to work as indentured laborers on that very land just to survive.
I mean, the psychological violence, that is just staggering. But the sources do point out that this brute force eventually sparked the Mau Mau Rebellion, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And when the British realized they were actually losing the military war in the forests, they shifted tactics. They introduced something called the Swinnerton Plan in the 1950s. What was the mechanism there?
The Swinnerton Plan was pure weaponized capitalism. The colonial administration realized that poor, landless people have absolutely nothing to lose.
Which makes them excellent revolutionaries.
Exactly. So to stop the Mau Mau, the British decided to manufacture an African middle class. They started issuing individual private land titles to a very select group of loyalist Africans.
Hold on. So they stole the land communally and then tried to sell it back individually to divide the population.
Yes, that is exactly what they did. They deliberately created a buffer class of propertied Africans.
That is so cynical.
It was. The logic was basically, if an African man now has a paper title to a valuable farm, he is going to defend that paper title against the radical Mau fighters who want to tear down the whole system. It was a counterinsurgency strategy, just disguised as agricultural reform.
And it planted a massive generational time bomb. I mean, you were splitting villages into those who profited by collaborating with the colonial regime and those who were forced into the forests to fight them.
Right, the divide and conquer strategy.
Which naturally brings us to the people actually doing the fighting. Now, we've all heard of the Kapenguria Six from history class, but the sources focus really heavily on one specific figure, Bildad Kaggia. Who was he really, before the arrest?
So Kaggia was born in 1921, and he wasn't always a radical. In fact, he actually fought for the British.
Wait, really?
Yeah. He was a staff sergeant in the British Army during World War II. He served in the Middle East and in Europe.
But how does fighting for the British turn you against them? I mean, you'd think that would make him a loyalist.
It was the exposure. Think about it. You're a young African man taught your whole life that the white man is this invincible, superior deity.
Right.
Then you go to Europe. You see white men crying, bleeding, acting cowardly, living in poverty. You visit Jerusalem. You realize the world is incredibly vast, and the colonial narrative back home is just a fabricated myth. And yet, despite fighting side by side with them, Kaggia returned to Kenya and faced the exact same systemic racism. He was still treated as a second-class citizen in his own country.
That cognitive dissonance bleeding for an empire that treats you as subhuman? That's the spark right there. I read in the sources he even rejected foreign religion when he got back.
He did, completely. He viewed the foreign iterations of religion as psychological poison meant to subjugate Africans.
Wow.
So he started Dinia Kaggia, or Kaggia's religion. He stripped away all the European elements and merged African spiritualism directly with fierce anti-colonial politics.
But he wasn't just a preacher. Right. I mean, the man was a strategist. The sources outline how he took over the Clerks and Commercial Workers Union and then engineered a hostile takeover of the Kenya African Union, or KAU, specifically the Nairobi branch. Why attack his own side?
Well, because he viewed the moderate elites running KAU as overly polite. They were petitioning the British for crumbs,
Like maybe a few more seats in the Legislative Council.
Exactly. But Kaggia demanded the whole loaf. He completely despaired of constitutional change. His unapologetic militancy drew him right into the inner circle, and he eventually joined the Mau Mau Central Committee.
And that was the apex body directing the armed struggle from Kubai House in Nairobi, right?
Yes, which made him public enemy number one. In October 1952, the British launch Operation Jock Scott. They declare a state of emergency, round up the leadership, and charge the Kapenguria Six with managing the Mau Mau.
That's Jomo Kenyatta, Paul Ngei, Achieng Oneko, Fred Kubai, Karumba, and Kaggia.
Right. And they're sent to Lokiton, this brutal prison in the Northern Frontier District.
Their incarceration, which was intended to basically decapitate the rebellion, actually immortalized them.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, their imprisonment really catalyzed the collapse of the British Empire in Kenya. It also heavily influenced the global human rights movement. The sources even note their imprisonment was a precursor to Amnesty International's whole concept of prisoners of conscience.
Wait, there is a detail in the sources here that completely blew my mind. We say Kapenguria Six, but the sources mention a figure referred to as the seventh member, Zephaniah Yambu Mwakio. Who is he?
Yeah, he is a perfect example of the forgotten heroes we never hear about. While the Six were at Lokitong, Mwakio was detained at Shimalatewa during the exact same period for his deep involvement in the Mau Mau.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, and he is the landowner of the site where the historic Kenyatta caves sit in Taita Taveta. His story reminds us that the struggle wasn't just 6 men. It was a sprawling network of thousands who just never made it into the national textbooks.
And that leads us to the breaking of the dawn, right? 1961, the leaders are released. 1963, independence. Ooh, the speeches are soaring, the flag is raised.
The dream realized.
Supposedly. But let's go back to that Gabriel Omlo song, Lunchtime. That soaring rhetoric immediately collides with an incredibly grim reality on the ground. Why didn't independence fix the poverty?
Well, mainly because of a fundamental ideological schism at the very top of the new government over how to actually run the economy.
Yeah.
You had 2 totally opposing visions.
Okay, what were they?
On one side, President Jomo Kenyatta favored a conservative Africanization model.
Meaning what exactly in practical terms?
Meaning the capitalist property relations established by the British would remain completely intact. The state machinery wouldn't change at all. They would just, swap the white drivers out for black drivers.
So the system itself stayed the same.
Exactly. Kenyatta's priority was appeasing the departing British, securing foreign investment, and assuring multinational companies that their assets were perfectly safe.
Yeah, to play devil's advocate for just a second here, didn't Kenyatta have a point? He's looking at a post-war economy. If he suddenly dismantled the entire capitalist farming structure, wouldn't foreign capital have just fled, causing the new country to instantly collapse?
Yeah, that was certainly the pragmatic argument made by his camp. But Kaggia, along with Jaramogi Oginga Odinga and Pio Gama Pinto, saw it as a profound betrayal.
They favored a socialist model.
They did. Their counterargument was basically, what is the point of a stable economy if the millions of ordinary Kenyans who literally bled for freedom are still landless squatters? They demanded a massive redistribution of wealth, specifically returning the stolen white highlands to the poor and the Mau Mau veterans.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This clash crystallizes around one specific policy: willing buyer, willing seller. On paper, to a Western economist, that sounds perfectly fair, a free market transaction. Why was Kaggia so furious about this?
Well, think about the mechanism of this policy in context. Imagine a massive corporation illegally executes a violent, hostile takeover of your family's small business.
Okay. They use physical force, forge the documents, and throw you out on the street. 50 years later, a court finally admits it was illegal. But instead of just giving your business back, the judge tells you, good news, you are now free to buy your company back from the corporation at current market value.
That's insane. I'm bankrupt because they stole my business in the first place. How am I supposed to be a willing buyer?
Precisely. Kaggia vehemently argued that Africans should not have to use their meager wages to buy back land that was stolen at gunpoint.
It makes total sense.
But the heartbreaking outcome was totally predictable. The elite politicians, senior civil servants, and rich businessmen, the people who already had access to capital and loans, they formed massive land-buying companies.
Oh, no.
Yeah. They swept in and grabbed the vast tracts of the former White Highlands. The Mau Mau fighters, who had lived in the forests for a decade and possessed literally nothing, got absolutely nothing. This ideological war culminates in a deeply personal betrayal, too. In 1964, Kaggia actually resigns from his post as Assistant Minister of Education. He just refuses to be complicit in what he sees as a neo-colonial government.
Right.
But Kenyatta doesn't just let him walk away quietly, does he? He wants to destroy him politically.
No, he doesn't. Kenyatta actually travels to Kandara, which is Kaggia's own constituency, to publicly humiliate him.
I have the quote from the sources right here. This is wild. Kenyatta stands before Kaggia's impoverished constituents and says, "We were not jailed to suffer. We were jailed so that we could be leaders. Kaggia, what have you done for yourself? We were together with Paul Ngei in jail. He has planted a lot of coffee. We were together with Karumba. He is running his own business. Kaggia, what have you done for yourself?"
I mean, it is arguably one of the most consequential speeches in Kenyan history.
It really is.
Kenyatta is explicitly, publicly equating political leadership with personal wealth accumulation. He is literally mocking a man for not being corrupt.
The audacity is just chilling. The President of the Republic is essentially broadcasting a new national ethos. Public office is for personal eating. It normalizes using state power for self-enrichment.
It established what political scientists often call the gatekeeper state. But Kaggia's retort a few days later was equally defining.
What do you say?
He replied, "I was not elected to Parliament to obtain a large farm, a big house, or a transport business. My constituents sleep in mud houses, they have no stambas and have no businesses, so I am not ashamed to be identified with them."
Wow. He chose integrity over wealth. But the political machine was just a juggernaut. It crushed anyone who stood in its way. And this dynamic is what led another prominent figure, J.M. Kariuki, to famously declare that Kenya had become a nation of 10 millionaires and 10 million beggars.
Yeah, and Kariuki was himself a wealthy man. But he recognized that building a nation on massive structural inequality was just a recipe for eventual disaster. And his outspokenness eventually cost him his life in an unresolved assassination in 1975.
This is incredibly heavy history. But understanding these mechanisms, how the rules were rigged from day one, is really the only way we can ever hope to change this system. Which is why I want to pause here and speak directly to you, the listener.
Yeah, this is so important.
If this history teaches us anything, it's that your voice matters. It's a weapon. The struggle for a just Kenya didn't end in the 1960s. It is an ongoing story, and you are an active participant in it right now. So go to www.wantamnotam.com right now and create your account. Join the Kenya Wantam Notam movement, KWM.
Absolutely.
All 47 counties are listed there. Identify your county and start posting. Share your ideas that can help change your village, your city, and your nation. Don't wait for someone in Nairobi to fix things. It starts with you.
And while you're at it, also go to our YouTube page and download the free ebooks, specifically the Forgotten Heroes series.
Yes, highly recommend those.
You really need to understand the minds of leaders like Bildad Kaggia to make sense of today. And let's connect on Facebook for more discussions. The link is facebook.com/Kenyampiatugapamoja.
So diving back in, engaging with these resources is vital because as we move into the next phase of the sources, we see the terrifying mechanics of what a state does when it shuts down open political space, right?
Yeah, it gets really dark. Following Kaggia's marginalization, he teams up with Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, and in 1966, they form the Kenya People's Union, the KPU.
This was the socialist alternative to the ruling party, KNU. It was meant to be the political home for the workers, the landless, and basically everyone disillusioned by the willing buyer policy.
And the state recognized it immediately as an existential threat. They didn't just debate the KPU, they weaponized the law against them.
Oh, so?
They amended the Constitution specifically to force all the MPs who defected to KPU to seek re-election in what became known as the Little General Election.
Let me get this straight. The government changed the national constitution purely to trigger an election they could rig against their opponents.
Yes, that's exactly what they did. And it went far beyond just legal maneuvers.
Yeah.
The state-controlled broadcaster, Voice of Kenya, imposed a total media blackout.
Wow.
If you were KPU, you just didn't exist on the radio. They seized the passports of KPU members so they couldn't travel internationally to raise awareness. Employers were heavily pressured by the state to fire any KPU supporters. It was death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts.
And it ultimately culminates in physical violence. Following unrest in Kisumu in 1969, the government bans the KPU entirely and detains its leaders, including Odinga. Kenya effectively becomes a de facto one-party state.
Right.
And this authoritarian playbook transitions seamlessly into the era of Daniel Arap Moi after Kenyatta's death in 1978. We also have to acknowledge the absolute chilling effect of the political assassinations during this time, like Pio Gama Pinto in 65, Tom Mboya in 69, and J.M. Kariuki in 75.
Which leaves the citizenry in an impossible position. This raises an important question. How do you fight a dictatorship when forming a political party gets you jailed without trial and speaking at a rally gets you assassinated?
The resistance goes underground. I found this section of the sources fascinating because it draws a direct, unbroken line between the anti-colonial press of the 1940s and the post-colonial underground press of the 1980s.
It's a really incredible parallel.
Yeah. During colonial times, you had figures like Gakaro Wanjao and progressive Asian publishers like Patel and Vidyarthi who risked their lives to print Satyam Wafrika just to circumvent British censorship.
Decades later, a new generation had to use the exact same clandestine printing presses, but against an African government.
Exactly. We mentioned earlier that some radicals formed a workers' party. Well, that group evolved into the December 12 movement, or DTM.
Their core realization was that theoretical Marxist debates in university halls wouldn't change anything. They had to reach the masses. And one of the most effective and dangerous ways they did this was through cultural theater.
You're talking about Ngugi wa Thiong'o's play, Ngahiko Indinda, which translates to I Will Marry When I Want. Why was a play considered a threat to national security?
Because of how and where it was performed. They didn't stage it at the National Theatre in Nairobi for a bunch of university professors. They staged it in Kamirathu, which is an open-air theater in a village.
Oh, wow.
And they used ordinary peasants and factory workers as the actual actors. The play depicted the ongoing daily exploitation of the poor by wealthy, corrupt, post-colonial elites, and it was performed in the local language.
So it was consciousness raising in real time. You're sitting there watching your own life, your own poverty, being explained not as bad luck, but as a systemic robbery by the politicians currently in power.
The Moi regime recognized the danger of that instantly. They banned the play, detained Ngugi wa Thiong'o without trial in a maximum security prison, and eventually forced him into exile.
But you cannot detain an idea.
No, you can't.
This sets the stage for the explosion of underground literature in the 1980s. The sources highlight publications with these incredible names. Pambana, which means struggle, Chesh, meaning spark, and Mpatanishi, the arbiter. Why didn't they just write op-eds in the Daily Nation?
Because the mainstream foreign-owned press was heavily compromised. They were seen as liberal, cautious, and ultimately accommodating to the status quo. To criticize the president directly in a mainstream paper was just unthinkable.
So they bypassed them entirely.
Exactly. These Marxist-Leninist papers bypassed the system. They were printed in secret, often at night in basements, and distributed clandestinely.
They would literally drop them in Matatis or slip them under doors at dawn, and they pulled no punches. They exposed high-level corruption, criticized the presence of foreign military bases, and explicitly demanded an end to the dictatorship. This era gives birth to Mo Kenya, a massive underground movement.
Murang'a Kenya wasn't just complaining, right? They had a draft minimum program. They were demanding tangible structural changes. Social justice, functional public transport, living wages.
Tangible things that actually affect daily life.
Yes. They viewed themselves as the true ideological inheritors of the Mau Mau, forced back into the metaphorical forests to fight a new set of oppressors.
And the state's response was barbaric. This is the era of the infamous Nyo House torture chambers. Imagine being picked up off the street by special branch officers, taken to a waterlogged basement cell, and tortured for weeks simply because someone accused you of possessing a single Mo Kenya pamphlet.
The printed word was literally treason.
It was.
It was a very dark time. But we also have to remember that national politics is rarely experienced strictly at the national level. To the ordinary citizen, the grand ideological battles between Kaggia and Kenyatta, or Mo Kenya and Moi, are felt most acutely in their own backyard.
So what does this all mean for the local voter? Politics is always local, and the sources offer an incredible deep dive into Gem constituency in Saya County. It functions as a perfect, tragic microcosm of how national patronage, tribalism, and class warfare infect local villages. Let's walk through this timeline because the mechanics of it are wild.
Okay, so it starts in 1961, just before independence. You have a prominent leader, Bini Apollo Ohonga, but he actually steps down from contesting the local seat because he's terrified of the simmering clan tussles.
Wow, he just steps down.
Yeah, and this vacuum allows Arguing's Kodhek to win. Now, Kodhek is a national legend. He was the first African lawyer in Kenya, famous for defending Mau fighters in British courts.
But the national tragedy immediately alters the local landscape. In 1969, Kodhek dies in a highly suspicious car crash. And then a few months later, the iconic Tom Mboya is assassinated in Nairobi.
Right.
The entire Luo community is deeply traumatized and aggrieved,
Yeah.
and they swing massively toward Odinga's newly formed opposition party, the KPU.
Consequently, in Jem, a man named Wasanga Sijeyo rides that wave of anger and wins the seat on a KPU ticket. But his victory lasts barely any time.
What happened?
When Kenyatta's government bans the KPU nationally, they swoop into Jem and detain Sijeyo without trial.
See, this is what I mean by mechanics. The national state doesn't like the local vote, so they literally amputate the local leadership. Sijeyo is locked away, and the constituency becomes an absolute battleground. It perfectly mirrors the national divide between those connected to state power and those marginalized by it.
Definitely. Look at the vicious rivalry in 1979 and 1984 between Otieno Ambala and Horace Ongili.
Oh, this part was intense.
Extremely. Ambala was a wealthy man, but he was viewed by some local clans as an outsider or an immigrant to the area. But, and this is crucial, he had the backing of massive national figures, including Vice President Mwai Kibaki. He represented the state machinery.
And Horace Ongili was actually Ambala's former chief campaigner. I mean, the Shakespearean betrayal here is incredible.
Yeah.
Owiti turns on Ambala, taps into the local clan resentments against the outsider, and actually defeats Ambala in the 1984 election.
But the national state won't let it lie. President Moi visits the area and publicly praises Ongili, hinting at elevating him to national prominence.
Which just makes things worse locally.
Right. This perceived interference from the authoritarian president throws fuel on an already burning local fire. The tensions hit an absolute boiling point.
And it ends in horror. In May 1985, Horace Ongili is brutally assassinated. His body is found in a maize plantation. And in a twist so dark you couldn't write it in a movie, Otieno Ambala, who was immediately arrested in connection with his rival's murder, dies of an alleged heart attack in Kodiaga prison on the exact day of Ongili's burial.
It is a devastating story. And if you fast forward to the modern era, you see figures like Chikoyo Midiwo dominating the seat from 2007 to 2013 by riding the ODM party wave until his major showdown in 2017 with Elisha Odhiambo.
So the faces change.
The faces change, the party acronyms change, but the underlying machinery, the weaponization of clan loyalties, and the desperate scramble for national party patronage remains completely intact. Jem proves that the legacy of colonial boundaries and post-colonial patronage directly fuels modern local rivalries.
It's a national disease manifesting as a local symptom, which forces us to look at the attempt to finally cure that disease. We have to jump to 2007 and 2008.
Yeah, a critical turning point.
The unresolved powder keg of land injustice, engineered poverty, and deeply ethnicized politics finally exploded. The post-election violence? The statistics are just a scar on the national conscience. Over 1,100 Kenyans dead and 600,000 completely displaced from their homes, living in IDP camps in their own country.
It was the breaking point. The violence was horrifying, but it ripped the veil off the illusion. It forced the entire nation and the international community to finally confront the fact that the foundations laid in 1963 by the willing buyer, willing seller crowd were fundamentally rotten.
And this existential crisis led directly to the drafting and passing of the 2010 Constitution.
Exactly. And on paper, it is arguably one of the most progressive constitutions on the planet.
Because it actually tried to address the original sin of the land grabs. For the first time, it constitutionally recognized the ancestral lands of pastoralist communities, like the Rendille, the Turkana, and the Maasai.
Yes.
It wasn't just government land to be sold off to a foreign hotel chain anymore. It was legally recognized as community land.
And most crucially, it established the National Land Commission, the NLC.
Okay, what was the mechanism there? What was the NLC actually supposed to do?
The NLC was given a sweeping, monumental mandate. They were supposed to manage public land, monitor land use, and most importantly, formally investigate historical land injustices and recommend reparations.
So basically Kaggia's dream.
Yes. It was, in theory, the institutional realization of Bildad Kaggia's lifelong demands.
But I have to ask, did the NLC actually fix it? Did the people get their land back?
The reality, which is extensively documented in our sources, is starkly different from the constitutional ideal. The NLC has faced a relentless, suffocating campaign of political interference.
Yeah, actually.
It is chronically underfunded. And whenever it attempts to investigate the truly massive historical injustices, like the huge tracts in the Rift Valley or the coast, it hits an impenetrable brick wall of powerful elites, political dynasties, and corporate interests.
The ones who have spent half a century legally laundering illegally acquired land.
Exactly. It's the gatekeeper state protecting its own vault.
We are still seeing modern iterations of the exact same crimes. Public land in Dagoretti meant for schools being quietly allocated to private developers. The endless, catastrophic encroachment into the Mau Forest complex, which literally threatens the country's actual water supply for the sake of political logging contracts.
And we cannot forget the explosive 2004 Ndungu report.
Oh, tell me about that.
The Ndungu report was political dynamite. It was a formal commission that painstakingly documented and implicated the absolute highest levels of the previous governments.
Like who?
We're talking former presidents, senior civil servants, military officers, implicated in rampant illegal public land allocations. It named names.
Wow.
But implementing its recommendations to revoke those titles has been an almost impossible uphill battle against deeply entrenched wealthy interests who control the levers of the justice system.
It brings everything full circle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you reflect deeply on Bildad Kaggia. He warned the country in 1964. He walked away from ministerial power, from the cars and the salary, because he saw the precise mechanics of where the willing buyer, willing seller policy would lead.
He saw it all coming.
And here we are, decades later, and the tension between elite private property acquired through dubious means and the basic survival rights of communities remains the absolute defining issue of Kenya.
Kaggia understood something that many politicians still don't. True liberation requires systemic transformation, not just changing the personnel at the top.
Right.
The structural issues he fought against, crippling inequality, systemic corruption, the commodification of justice, are the exact same issues driving the protests and political movements led by the youth in Kenya today.
I want you, the listener, to use your imagination for a moment. Picture Bildad Kaggia. Here is a man who fought in World War II, led the Mau Mau, went to maximum security prison for his country, and yet lived his final days operating a modest, dusty posho mill in Jericho.
Yeah, in relative poverty.
Exactly. He lived in poverty while his political peers literally owned hundreds of thousands of acres. Now imagine dropping Bildad Kaggia into today's political landscape. He looks around at the collapsing public services. He sees doctors on strike because hospitals have no gloves. He sees an astronomical national debt burdening unborn children.
And the persistent, arrogant, it's our turn to eat mentality of the elite.
Yes, flaunting their wealth. What would he do? He wouldn't negotiate for a slightly better tender. He wouldn't form a tribal coalition to share the spoils of a looted treasury. He would demand a total systemic revelation of integrity.
Absolutely.
I honestly think he might look at today's grassroots tribeless youth movements, the Gen Z movements taking to the streets with nothing but their phones and their courage, and see them as the true, long-awaited inheritors of the Mau Mau spirit, because they are the ones demanding a nation that serves its people, not its leaders.
That is a very powerful way to look at it.
And this is exactly why your voice matters. History is not a dusty textbook about the 1950s that you memorize for an exam. It is a living, breathing machine, and it's being built by you right now in your communities.
Right.
Visit www.wantimnotum.com, create your account, and identify your county among the 47. Start sharing your ideas, expose the rot where you see it, and highlight the solutions where you build them.
And again, don't forget to head over to our YouTube page and download the Forgotten Heroes series, ebooks. Arm yourself with the history of leaders who stood for truth when it was dangerous.
Yes, and join the daily ongoing conversation on Facebook at facebook.com/Kenyan.
A national foundation built on a stolen blueprint will always be unstable. But recognizing that history, understanding its mechanics, well, that is the very first step to tearing it down and building something meant to last.
Thank you for listening to the Kenya Wantim Notum movement, KWM.